The prayer altar is the servicing of the relationship between man and God. It's the communication that services the relationship between man and God. Genesis chapter 19 verse 27. Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. It didn't mention that he stood there to ask for anything or to request for anything. He just stood before the Lord. It's communion. In 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 1, Elijah said, before God whom I stand. He didn't say I'm standing there and making some requests or asking things, but we are together. In Zechariah chapter 14 verse 12 to verse 14, chapter 4 verse 12 to verse 14, verse 14 in particular, he said, these are the two anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth. Prayer altar. It's the altar of communion, the altar of intimacy. In this regard, if there is anything to ask at all, it is asking to know him, like Moses did in Exodus 33 and in verse 13. Then in verse 18, it is asking to know him. Now therefore, I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now your way, that I may know you, that I may find grace in your sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. Verse 18 said, and he said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. In Philippians chapter 3 verse 10, Paul the apostle said, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection. On this note, prayer is about knowing him, intimacy with him, communion with him, servicing our communication. If there is anything to ask here, it is the asking to get to know him. That's prayer altar number one. Number two, the prayer altar is the altar of consecration. It's the altar of consecration. That is the altar of sanctification. It's the altar of cleansing. But make sure you don't stop unless Satan will make mess up. To step into the presence of God is both to expose and expel sin. It exposes and expels. That was the lesson we learned from the life of Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6 verse 1 all the way to verse 9. In the year King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting up on the throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims, each one had 6 wings, and with 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, woe is me, for I am undone. When I saw God, when I stood before his presence, I saw how undone I am. I was, how unclean, and how I dwelt in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with the tongues from off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth and said, Lo, this has touched thy lips, and thy iniquity is taken away, and thy sin is purged. At the place of the altar, the prayer altar is the place where sin can be exposed and expelled. When you see the Almighty, you will also see your iniquity. In the presence of his holiness, your filthiness is exposed. That is what happens. In Matthew chapter 6, in the prayer Jesus taught us, I believe in verse 12, he said, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Another one said, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespassed against us. Beloved brothers and sisters, this is the matter. You cannot live in prayer and be comfortable in sin. And you cannot live in sin and be comfortable in prayer. That's how it is. You cannot live in prayer and be comfortable in sin.